Lord, open our eyes that we may see Jesus. Amen. On this seventh Sunday after Trinity, our Gospel reading continues in Matthew chapter 13. The last two Sundays' Gospels have looked at the two big parables which begin that chapter, the parable of the sower and then the parable of the wheat and the weeds, and those two take up the bulk of the chapter. But then we have five short parables of the kingdom, and that's what we're looking at today. And this is from Matthew 13, verses 31 to 33 and 44 to 52. And if you read that passage through, or you've heard it read already in your worship, you'll have heard those five parables with a little saying at the end, which is intriguing, and I regularly come back to in my own thinking as a preacher and teacher of the Bible. So we've got seven parables in the whole chapter. Matthew is very good at grouping Jesus' teaching in big chunks of teaching, and this Matthew 13 is the parable chapter with these seven parables of the kingdom and five short ones for today. And they are the mustard seed, the yeast, the treasure hidden in a field, the merchant in search of pearls, and the net in the sea. And each of them in one way or another tells us something more about the kingdom, what God is like, the king, what his kingdom is like, and those of us who live with and preach and teach and hear about and proclaim the kingdom should be like. Go through them very briefly and just pick something from each. The mustard seed, the idea is that it's tiny, but it grows into the biggest of the shrubs or bushes in the Middle East. Tiny, tiny little seed, and we know how astonishing nature is in that from something very tiny can grow something substantial, and in that tiny is all the instructions and all that's needed to grow that great mustard bush. The kingdom of heaven can be tiny, invisible, unseen, apparently inconsequential. Some little deed you do or a word in season that seems almost irrelevant at the time. Again and again, I've had this. If I've been working with people, someone's come back to me and said, "You said something to me 20 years ago, and it sunk in, and it just changed me." And I've forgotten I've said it, and it was almost inconsequential at the time, but that's the mustard seed, or a tiny good deed for someone. That again, I've had that, just a moment of kindness, perhaps in a funeral situation or something, and years later, that will come back and grow into faith and kingdom energy in someone. It's remarkable to see, but that's what the mustard seed is like. And then yeast, again, virtually invisible in the mix. The point of yeast isn't that it's invisible or very small quantities, it's that it affects the whole thing. A little bit of yeast can get a whole lot of flour to be light dough and bread, or little bit of yeast can take a large amount of liquid and bring something alcoholic and interesting out of it. The little bit can affect the whole in a huge way. And again, that's true of kingdom behavior, kingdom speaking, thinking, praying. Just a little bit of Christian input can have an influence far beyond what we could imagine or think or understand. Now, we may be used to yeast. If you're a cook or a baker or a beer maker or something, you know how phenomenal the effect of yeast can be. Think of the kingdom in that way. Just little bits of kingdom action or speaking can affect the whole world, can make a huge difference. May it be so. And then a treasure hidden in a field. Yes, sometimes the kingdom is hidden away and we need to dig, we need to look, We need to be earnest in our searching for it. We can say, and it's true, the kingdom of heaven is near, or even the king is near. We can say that to people. We can remind ourselves of that as a truth. But sometimes you do have to look. You have to look for that hidden treasure. It's worth it. It's absolutely worth it. As Jesus says, ask, seek, knock. Make the effort. Go looking, go searching for the kingdom. Search for signs of God at work in the world. Dare to search for signs of God at work in yourself or in your own church community. I've been astonished and thrilled during this lockdown time to see signs of God at work. You might think this is strange, in coffee by Zoom or other clever high-tech media after services. I've seen people meeting together informally and visited a number of churches where this has happened, and they've been talking about the worship or talking about their experience of God or talking about how they pray during the week or how they feel God is with them. Something that's happened in this lockdown is that churches which have set up a sort of Zoom coffee morning or Zoom coffee after the service have been finding almost an explosion of something new going on, of people talking spiritually in a way we don't always over coffee at the end of a service. We need to look for it, but when we look for it, it's there, this treasure that's hidden. And the merchant in search of pearls. And the kingdom is now not just the object that's hidden, it's the merchant who's doing the searching, particularly pearls of great price, particularly special good quality pearls. The kingdom isn't the good quality pearls, although of course they could be a picture of the kingdom, the treasure is, but the kingdom here is the merchant looking. It's the activity of searching out God at work, the activity of looking for the good in people and in situations, the activity of looking for and expecting to find God in our midst among us. That activity and the ones who engage in that activity are also pictures of the kingdom. You and I looking for something good in a situation. You and I believing that something good can come out of a situation. We're the merchants in search of the pearls. We are the kingdom in doing that. You can be so. And then the net in the sea is a little bit like the parable of the wheat and the weeds, because the net brings up all sorts of things. Some things that the fisherman wants and some things the fisherman definitely doesn't want. But the net brings them all. The kingdom can draw all sorts in. The kingdom, because it somehow pictures God's love and the wonder of God. The kingdom can draw all sorts of people close. Jesus, of course, had many people following him. He was feeding thousands in his miracles. Only a relatively small number was still following him by the end of his life, but he touched huge numbers in one way or another. The kingdom, if it's proclaimed, if it's lived out, can draw many, many people in, like a net in the sea, can bring whatever's there to light. Some of that's the real thing. Some of that's the real kingdom fruit. Some of that's the fish that the fishermen are after and that will sell and feed people and satisfy and delight people. Some of it isn't and ultimately has to go back or isn't what you're looking for. But the kingdom net draws many, many in. It gives everyone the opportunity to be caught and found. And in a way, as someone engaged in kingdom, you're doing Peter, you're being a fisher of people with that kingdom net. So we've got those 5 parables, each in a slightly different way, telling us what the kingdom is like, how small things make a difference, how small things can affect great things, how treasure can be hidden away and might need looking for, how the act of looking for it is kingdom activity, and how the net of the kingdom can draw all sorts in. The kingdom is a very remarkable picture in the New Testament. But Jesus finishes this paragraph, this passage, with a wonderful little word about teaching the kingdom and preaching the kingdom. He says, Every scribe, a scribe is New Testament language, it's literally a writer, but it means a teacher, someone who teaches, or we might say preaches. Every scribe who's been trained for the kingdom of heaven, that's unlike the Old Testament scribes, is like the master of a household who brings out of his treasure what is new and what is old. That's what the kingdom's like. For those of us who are teaching and preaching, and for many of you who are sharing something of the gospel with your friends, or involved in discussions in a house group, or even discussions at work about religion and church and stuff, the kingdom involves new things and old things. There are some old truths that we'll dig up sometimes, some of these pearls of great price, some of these things of great wisdom, some of these mustard seeds, they're as old as the hills. And sometimes there's something absolutely new, a different way of putting it, a reality of a new experience. And at the heart of that old and new, of course, is the kingdom itself, or put it another way, the love of God, reaching out and drawing people in. That's as old as you can get. The love of God goes right back to the beginning of the Bible and beyond. The love of God is the fixed, unchangeable point. But the love of God is experienced anew through telling new stories, putting it in different ways, looking for God in the world and finding signs of his activity, getting excited at what he's done and who he is. The truth is old and it's ever new. When we preach, teach, encourage, remember the kingdom and our calling to be part of it and to grow and build it, let's keep in front of us this wonderful description of the kingdom and the message of the kingdom as being both old and new. Absolutely fixed truth, unchanging, but absolutely new experience. God's mercies new every morning. God's love for you, something to be experienced afresh today. Amen.